What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I'm your host, Todd Rosales, and we are here live at the MJBizcon Convention 2023. I am here with Nohtal.
Yeah.
Nohtal, I'm very excited to talk to you, man. We share a PR rep in common. When he told me that he repped you, I've been looking at your posts on Instagram, not Instagram, on LinkedIn and everything else. Automated fucking hash holes.
Yeah, dude.
I really got to stop cursing the first 5 minutes, but automated hash holes, man, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Like, how do you guys do that?
Well, it's pretty cool.
So for those of you who don't know, and if you don't know what it is, I don't think you're watching the show anyway, but a hash hole is essentially a constant line of concentrate down the middle, typically rosin, in the middle of a joint. So when you burn it, it has a little hole in the middle. It looks like a donut.
Yep.
And they're not the easiest things in the world to roll by hand, but they're awesome. They're really enjoyable. It's super innovative in the industry. Fidel's hash hole was the first one that I had ever tried, and then Loaded Co was another one. But these are typically hand rolled.
Yeah.
Now, what you've done, and part of the problem with that is they ain't cheap. They're like
$80.
80 on the low end. Like a Fidel's hash hole was $150. Like, and don't get me wrong, I understand the contents of the joint, but $150 to literally burn in one sitting, well, ridiculous. So I imagine a lot of that has to do with the labor and everything else. So tell me, how did you get the idea for this? And let's talk through why. I think it's awesome.
So we actually have a few customers, right? So we've been around for a few years. Like we've been selling a machine called the GECO robot for about 3 years. And what that does is actually injects the center of joints with concentrate material.
Okay.
And so when we would inject those joints with concentrate, it would kind of donut a little because there was a needle and it like basically made a little snake down the center. But what that did is that we had to melt down the concentrate to get it through the needle, right? And it would effectively absorb into the flower. So that snake would be a part of the flower. And we've been doing that for a couple of years. In the beginning of this year, especially, people were like, yo, I want to make some hash holes. And I know I can do it with your machine. We're like, I mean, we can kind of do it, right? It does a small donut.
Yeah.
Like, no, we want a big hunkin' Fidel's type hash hole.
That's awesome.
And we want it to crackle. And I was like, okay.
And we wanted to crackle.
And so really it was a development done with my customers.
Okay.
And we effectively just optimized the machine. Because the way the GECO works initially is that there's a needle that pokes down the center. And then on the way out, it distributes concentrate and kind of like fills that center hole with like oil. But then when we do the hash hole, so we call it the GECO Plus, it's the donut maker version. We just optimize those two functions and separate them.
Okay.
So then we poke a hole first with our poker, but it's a much bigger diameter. It's like 4 millimeters large.
Okay.
So it's like that when the joint is like that. It's a large percentage of the size of the joint. And so it creates a large cavern. And then we make the needle even larger so we don't have to decarb the material or anything. We can squeeze batter in like a toothpaste consistency, like a wax consistency. And then it fills up that cavern. So then it actually looks like the snake, right? When they hand roll it and roll a little snake, they drop it in, they flip it around. So this is really like squeezing out that snake out of a large needle.
That's awesome, man. And by the way, I can't tell you how many times I've laid down the perfect snake. Everything's evenly distributed. Then my fucking knee hits the table or something, and it goes on. I'm just like, it's gonna be perfect. But so does the machine roll the joints too?
So we have a different system that rolls the joints, but they talk to each other.
Okay.
So we sell the Aura One, which is a system that will make blunts. It'll make joints, and then there's a robotic arm that hands it off from that system to our GECO robot that then infuses the rosin.
Like the greatest version of Willy Wonka I've ever seen. That's really cool, man. Tell me, I mean, I know we started at the hash hole thing, so let's back all the way up. Tell me about your background. Like, I know you have deep engineering background. Was it you worked for NASA, if I remember correctly?
I worked for NASA and the Jet Propulsion Center in LA.
Still sending people to the moon, huh?
No, Mars. NASA doesn't care about the moon. That's old news.
Oh man, well, you're sending people to the moon with your hash holes now.
Sending them into space for sure.
Very cool. So were you just a cannabis fan? Tell me what brought you into this industry.
So I've always been a cannabis fan more than alcohol. Like by a lot. Like alcohol hasn't been like a good thing in my family. And so like I always kind of gravitated away from alcohol and more towards cannabis. And when I was in college, I was a big user. And then when I went to JPL, I kind of like toned it down a bit. But the first product that my company made wasn't actually in cannabis at all. When we were like kind of moonlighting for JPL, or I guess we were moonlighting
for yourself.
Yeah, moonlighting for myself at JPL. We built this company, and we were actually doing inventory management for e-commerce companies, like sorting things. That's where the name Sorting Robotics came from.
So how do you go from rockets to e-com sorting?
Well, we actually sorted like trading cards, you know, like Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, Magic the Gathering cards.
Magic the Gathering cards.
Yeah. So we made this robot that sorted Magic the Gathering cards for people that sold them online, because a lot of kind of students of the game and like, you know, consumers will sell their cards back to stores, and then they'll buy bulk, and then they'll kind of sift through them, they'll sort through them, they'll organize them, and then they'll post them online. And before our system, they had to do all that by hand. Like they hired high schoolers and paid them in pizza or something like that. And we built a machine that did it all in like a little box. And we did that for 2 years, for 2018, 2019. And then we got into something called a Y Combinator, which is like an accelerator program. Okay, cool.
One of the most famous ones.
Yeah. Kind of they call the Harvard of Silicon Valley, right?
They pioneered the safe note.
Yeah, they invented the safe note. They like started. They were like where Dropbox and DoorDash got started, Airbnb, and so we got into that, and we got into that because we wanted to get a bigger market. And then there we made a bunch of friends, and some of our friends were starting cannabis companies. And so when we were trying to find a bigger market, our friends were like, "Yo, like, can you help us?" This is back in like late 2019, and we said, "Oh yeah, we can probably figure something out. Like, what do you want us to build?" They're like, "Dude, no one's serving the cannabis industry, and it's because it's federally illegal." And back then there was like no automation, right? Like everyone was still doing by hand. They were still hand packing.
Pretty much you had to roll mass amount of joints as knock boxes.
Yeah, it was just straight knock box.
And I mean, if you've ever had a joint from a knock box, you typically have to continue to pack it after you buy it and like work it. They're not great.
Yeah, you gotta whip it. Yeah. So we wanted to start helping our friends on how to do that. So in 2020, we actually got into the cannabis industry. And then as a part of that, we didn't really know about, I mean, I worked at NASA. One of my co-founders worked at NASA. The other one was doing a PhD in computer vision, right? So it wasn't like the most, cannabis type guys. So I kind of took a few months away and set up a cannabis co-packing company in Oakland with a few of my like traditional market friends. And we like got a social equity license and started building stuff. And then for the next 2.5 years, I was like flipping pounds and like setting up a whole cannabis co-packing company and like learning what it was like to be a plant touching operator.
You found all the holes firsthand.
I felt the holes. Like, I mean, even on the finance side, like I help some of my customers on their taxes. Like I'm like, they're like, how do I do this? I'm like, okay, I'm not a tax professional, but this is how we did it. Maybe this applies to you. And so like, we did that for so long, and then we eventually sold it to a dispensary chain here in California to focus, completely on the robots. And in 21 we decided to start with Gico. Then 22 we launched another product, and then this year we're launching Stardust, which like coats the outside of the joint with kief to make kind of like Jeter style fuzzy joints.
That's awesome, man. I love seeing the automation here. So let's go back to you, because what you're doing in cannabis is great. Working for JPL, phenomenal job. Did you always have the assumption or desire to be an entrepreneur, or how did that come about? Where, like, listen, anybody whose parents say, "Oh, yeah, my son works at JPL, that's a cushy job, stay there," right? I'm sure there's a pension at some point. So, why take the leap to do your own thing?
So this is gonna sound kind of weird, but I actually started a startup when I was in grad school.
Okay.
For 3D printing, and we made it was a little startup. Kind of shut it down after a couple of years because we had issues with our investor and stuff like that. And
investors are the worst.
It gets to be sometimes weird, right? And so not in this company. I love all my investors.
Well, it's funny. You have to really pick your investors, right? And just a little aside, the reason I say that, I was having a conversation with our CEO. It always blows my mind when you have a founder-led company, and then you get a bunch of outside investors, and then that founder who was the vision, the driver of the company, his job or her job completely changes to be basically PR and IR, right? It's all PR and IR. It's like, wait, you have this person who had the passion, who had the vision, who had the idea, and now they're not doing what made the company great anymore. And that's where you have to be careful, I always think.
Yeah, we actually hired an IR team recently just to deal with stuff like that, because I don't want to do that. I want to do the creative product, customer centric development.
Yeah, I mean, candidly, if you said that we built robots, I'd be like, yeah, you need an IR team, because that's not, you're not a salesperson. That's not your specialty, and that takes a special skill. But going back, you had a startup.
Yeah, so I had a startup. I had to shut it down, but after that, I was like really into the building companies. I'm like, yeah, I could definitely do this. Yeah, it's stressful and stuff, but I think it's like one of the harder things to do, and I think that really attracts me in terms of the complexity of things. And well, when I was getting out of graduate school, I had a choice between a few companies to work for, and like the main ones was like SpaceX or NASA. And to be completely honest, like NASA was going to be like a cushier job than SpaceX. And so I chose that one because I knew I wanted to start another company.
Smart.
Yeah. And I mean, dude, NASA, you get like 3-day weekends every other week. Like you work like 40 hours flat, you know, you get like I mean, you don't get paid as much as SpaceX, but it's still a pretty great job. And everyone there is like a genius, right? So like when you're learning things, you get like the best example of what to learn from when it comes to an engineering perspective. And so, and so when I joined NASA, I took a couple of years to kind of recover from my first startup, and then I was there for 4 years. So in the last 2 years, I was kind of thinking, what do I want to do next? What do I want to do next? Trading options for a while, and I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll be like a hedge fund manager, but that's kind of like a soul-sucking job. Yeah, I kind of noticed that like you don't really generate any value when you do stuff like that. It's like a zero-sum game. You're basically,
and if you don't like IR, that is not the job for you,
right? Because that's all you're doing, raising money.
All you're doing.
Yeah, and so I kind of turned away from that. I actually started like a hamburger company. Like dude,
you're a serial entrepreneur here.
Yeah, well, trust me, the conversations when you work at NASA with your manager who says, "What did you do this weekend?" I'm like, "Well, I was at a farmer's market selling vegan hamburgers." They're like, "Why?" Right? Just like, what? I'm like, "Well, I think the world needs like more, plant-based food." And they're like, "Okay, so about the like hyperspectroscopy of the system, like, can we talk about that instead of your hamburger thing?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do that." So I started that. That didn't really work out because I didn't want to do hamburgers. Yeah. When I shut that company down, I'm like, I'm gonna get back to my roots. And my roots were really in robotics and the whole like robotic Magic the Gathering card sorter.
Did you tinker with a lot of stuff when you were kids, like erector sets, Legos, and all that?
Yeah, for sure. I flew RC airplanes. I drove RC cars. Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of like robotics programming when I was younger. And so I had this idea to sort Magic the Gathering cards because when I was in high school, I was like a professional Magic the Gathering player.
Okay.
Yeah, like I went to Berlin for like a pro tour, and I went to nationals on the East Coast.
I ever went to was my local card store for a tournament.
Okay, yeah, I crushed those in high school. I mean, but that's all I did.
It was the guys like you that made me realize, like, yeah, I can't do this.
I mean, maybe. Yeah, so I was really into it, and after I had this robotics knowledge, I was like, all right, I'm gonna start a robotics company because I know like what the business looks like. I know how to build it, and I'm like passionate about that industry because I used to play it professionally. And so we started there.
You guys still do anything in the card world, or?
We actually sold that company.
Okay.
Yeah, so when we got into cannabis, it was going to be too difficult to split our focus. 100%. Because it's like not only a different system, but it's like a different industry, right? So you need to kind of create like a new company almost.
They might smoke some weed though.
I don't know how many Magic players smoke weed. Like, I feel like they just, my experience is all of us like around a kitchen table, just like eating pizza and drinking beers and playing. That's like the, maybe, I mean, but then again, I played like 10 years ago, right? So
well, that's cool, man. Like, so you got the robotics company, and all of a sudden when you see the opportunity in cannabis as somebody who was a consumer, did you get excited about that?
Well, to be honest, my first idea of what I wanted to start the next company was in cannabis, but I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know anything about cannabis. I had a couple friends that like did trimming, and like one guy sold terpenes, and I asked him like, can I build something? This is back in like 2016.
Yeah.
And I even asked one of my advisors at NASA, I was like, I'm actually thinking about building something in cannabis. Like, you need to be very careful about that because it's still federally illegal and you work for a federal company. So like, you need to be very sensitive of how you deal with that. So like, I kind of had to prune that idea out of my brain, but I kept trying to think about it, right? And then once I got into Y Combinator and I met these guys that were actually starting cannabis companies, and they were like CEOs, right? Founders. So they knew the problems and they actually could tell me what I needed to do. Once I got to that level, I was like, oh man, I wish I knew this, 4 years ago.
Dude, it's fun. It's great being an operator and then going somewhere else. Like my whole thing with Green Check, right? I helped build a multi-state cannabis brand, and I knew where all the holes were. The holes from a data standpoint, a hole from a payment standpoint. And I just came in, and they had made 2 different acquisitions, and I looked. I go, if you combine this and this, we're gonna solve a lot of problems. So like, like, how do you know? I'm like, because I didn't have access to that. That's how I know.
Yeah.
So it's going in what you did and went and did the operations and built that distributorship, probably one of the smartest things that you can do.
I mean, name one robotics company in the space where their like executive staff has run a co-packing company.
I mean, we can go walk around. I don't think we're gonna find one.
Yeah, I know. There's like not a single person in this building, right,
Cool.
that can actually claim that they did.
I love the innovation that you're doing on joints and making hash holes. I'm hoping more affordable, more widely available. All the infused joints. It's something I love seeing, the innovation in this industry, and especially the automation. I definitely got to come by the booth and see the setup.
Yeah, get you those samples too.
So what do we have looking for the future? What are you working on now that you can share? I know it's a lot of
there's
stuff.
a lot of special things in the background.
Is it mostly all for pre-rolls and infused?
I'm trying to focus a lot on pre-rolls.
Do you guys? So let me ask you a question. Does it actually roll, or is it stuffing a cone?
It stuffs a cone.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have 3 main machines right now that we sell.
Okay.
One's the pre-roll manufacturing system, the Aura, and then the other one's the Gico, which does the injection and creates the hash holes, and the other one's the Stardust, which creates the keef, bubble hash, THC on the outside.
Cool,
so
awesome.
I would say this next 18 months, it's going to be trying to get all those keef coated guys to get out of doing it by hand and pull them over to the machine side, and then starting to finalize the bridge between the rolling, the injecting, and then the keefing on the outside. And I think that's gonna keep us pretty occupied for the foreseeable future.
Very cool, man. Well, I think the opportunity is huge. Really enjoyed the conversation. Definitely want to do this again sometime.
Yeah, for sure.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thank you, guys.